All right. I guess we should get started. I was hoping to see Greta's face, but maybe she'll make an appearance later. So I mentioned before some of you joined that today I was going to take back my sympathy for those who didn't like this novel and just be an unapologetic champion of Hugo and Toilers of the Sea. So I still intend to do that. And I was trying to, oh, there's Greta. I was trying to plan out how the sequence of thoughts and how we ought to discuss these chapters. And then I just realized I don't think there's any option but to discuss the end first. That's what's going to be on everybody's mind. So why don't we just dive right in and talk about what your reaction was to the ending, whether the ending is necessitated by the rest of the novel, whether it fit in your mind, what you think the significance of the ending is, or how it integrates with Hugo's purpose in this novel overall. Those are big enough questions to get us started. I think maybe just starting with people's reactions in general.
Well, I was angry. I felt betrayed, I don't know, by Hugo, because he's usually so not positive. It's not positive exactly that I was hoping for, but usually, you know, the hero wins. And in this case, I felt like the hero did not win.
That's an interesting so let's pause on that thought for a minute. Does the hero usually win? Or in what sense does the hero win in Hugo? Because I certainly can relate to the spirit of what you're saying, but at the same time, if we concretize some of the heroes, and I'm a little afraid of spoilers here, Valjean, he wins, but
yes.
Or Simordan in 93, does he win? Govan, does he win? I don't know, but I completely sympathize with the feeling that something seemed different about this ending. And that's a matter of real curiosity for me. Why it's different, whether it's deliberately different, whether it's acceptably different. Because reading it the first time, I did feel upset by the last pages of the book. I felt upset, and that's not something I usually feel when I read it. Upset meaning not upset by the events of the story, but upset that was how it ended.
And I think with the end of 93, the events were, they did seem to flow out of the story and fit with it. It might have gone another way, but the way it went made a lot of sense. This one, I don't understand Gilliatt well enough, and his what Déruchette meant to him to understand the ending, at least not right now, not in the first read.
Well,
in a way, I could see it for a different, if it had been more melodramatic character, been a more fully socialized character, I think I could understand like the despair or something and getting overwhelmed by that. But Gilliatt is strange enough that I don't get what was moving him.
See, I kept expecting him to leave his place on the rock up until the end. I was like, oh, he's gonna get up and leave. He's gonna get up and leave. The entire time I was reading that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he still could have. Like, I don't know. I think he still could have. And the way I see it is kind of like some kind of like rebirth or like baptism or something. And he's going to have something new going on after that. But I don't know. I found it very...
I think you're desperately clinging to that possibility. Because what is the last... the last line is, we could probably spend the hour talking just about that, but it's like, there was only the sea. So the idea is almost like he and the sea are one at that point, which I think is fascinating. So Shoshana, what you came into is us just discussing the ending. I decided it was mandatory that we start by talking about the end.
Sure. And
Because
sure, and I'm sorry I'm late. I had a
that's okay.
family, from Israel talking to me, and I had talked to him. Well, everybody knows that the end is an issue, and I think that there are two things that make something of a difference in the perspective. One is when you think about other works you've read by Hugo, and the good characters end up dying. Okay. Well, you've done Notre Dame, you've done Les Miserables. The second raters are the ones who were still walking around at the end. But the characters we love, he's given them heaven instead of earth. And that's a perspective that that's not the way I look at it, but I think it is the way that he looks at it, and that's what Juliet wants. I think also you can definitely see the deliberateness that he created the marriage. He created the circumstances. He set everything up so that it's his will. And that's something we've seen all the way through, that he makes things happen the way that he's not beaten by anything. And the other piece of course, is what is there for him now? He's done everything. What's his second act going to be? And
well, I
mean, it's not the way that I would write a novel.
Yeah.
It's not the way that Ayn Rand would write a novel, but I think that for Victor Hugo, this is what he chooses.
Mm-hmm. I thought his second act could just be Captain of the Durand. I think that's part of what felt so upsetting to me when I first read the ending. I am going to make some arguments in favor of it just because of a second reading, but it felt like he could just even swear off romance and just have his wife be the Durand after that. That seemed like it would be consistent with his character to me, but it's not that. So I noticed some things that Hugo did this time to kind of prepare us that would be the ending. One was his walk. I forget what was happening here. And he takes the path running along the wall of the garden. And as he's walking along this path that he's walked so many times, everything is Déruchette. Everything is a memory of her. So it's as if when he made that resolution to go off and rescue the engines on her behalf, that became the fixed idea. It became the purpose of his life. And then when that was taken away from him, the whole of his purpose was taken away. That seems to be how it stood for him. And it's funny because Joseph and I talked about this very briefly. And as we were talking about that idea, I suddenly remembered a line from the beginning of this section that was about Lathierry and not about Gilliatt. But I still wonder whether it was meant to set us up for Gilliatt's end, because it said, life is a journey and an idea is the itinerary. Without an itinerary, the journey comes to an end. The objective is lost and the strength to pursue it has gone. And the entirety of his itinerary was Déruchette, right or wrong, whether we like that that's what it was or not, whether we think he could have had changed itineraries. It just seems like that's what it was. And so he lost his purpose.
I think what's strange about it is that so much of the middle of the book doesn't mention her. Like the part where he's doing all of that, we talked about this, I guess, two sessions ago, where it kind of doesn't mention her at all until the part where he has to rest. And then it says he thought of what Déruchette would have thought if she'd seen him resting.
Right. But
the bulk of the description is about his contention with the unknown, not his obsession. I guess obsession is the wrong word, but his devotion to Déruchette. So it feels weird because Déruchette isn't the big idea in the book, right? So what you're saying about the idea is strange. It's weird because you get to the end and you're like, oh, she was that important to him, even though when he was out there, that wasn't the driving idea of his life.
Let me suggest a slightly different way of thinking about it, because what you just said related to what Andrew said at the beginning, like we can imagine a different character, more clearly in love, more obviously devoted, suffering this kind of despair when his love is lost. And it's hard to picture that for Juliet. And I realize as you're saying that that's not quite how I think of it. Because of that simplicity. Remember the idea of the compass of instinct, the in kind of a primitive mind. It doesn't feel like he ever was madly in love with her in the sense that we usually think of characters who have great romances in novels. It feels a bit arbitrary that he seized upon this and it became his compass. And it's not that I don't believe it's real, but I just don't see it as quite the same feeling. It feels more abstracted than that. So it didn't come across to me like despair over a lost love, but just this was the thing that where his compass was pointed. And that's why it feels connected to her not being present in the part about the sea, because that's the direction the compass pointed and he goes for it wholly, but he's not really thinking about the reasons why.
And that's where you're saying it's like the Durand too, where you could also imagine that Thierry turning his life around without the Durand, but he just doesn't want to.
Yeah, but he doesn't. He doesn't kill himself, or even that doesn't come to him. He has this sort of endurance, and then the natural healing is starting for him. Before Juliet comes back. So it's a contrast. It seems like an important contrast.
But he also has Déruchette, right? Thierry didn't just live for the Durand. He also, the Durand was almost it was part of him, but it was also a means to provide for Déruchette.
Well,
what's interesting is I was not mad, and like I was sad about it, but the more we talk about it, the more I understand why I actually like the ending. Obviously, but I would find it I can't imagine him working on the Durand. That would feel weird to me. And I think the thing that's been sticking for me is the idea of the simplicity of Juliet, right? He's not, his love for Déruchette was not this complex, passionate love. The reason he acts as a consequence is not very well thought out or complicated. And it fits that what happens when that love is taken away is also not like it had the same kind of feeling of the way he dies too is not this passionate. It's just he's sitting there watching, and as that thing that's been moving him the whole time goes away, he's slowly being engulfed by the water. I don't know, it just all kind of fit for me.
Well,
Related. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Shoshana.
I know. I think it's really important that he sees the ship going away, that he's succeeded, because he wanted Déruchette to have the man she loved. It turned out it wasn't him, and Hugo even sort of sets it up that she wrote the name when she was a child, in effect, and it's mentioned many times that she's 21, which is why she has autonomy now. And it's also mentioned that she didn't know what love was until she felt it for Ebenezer. So I think that it's in the novel. I think that Juliet understands that. It's not that she's chosen to love someone other than him. It's that she's now actually chosen love. And this is the man she loves. And she's not getting what she wants unless he goes through all these shenanigans. And we're running out of time, and he marries them. He's the witness, and they're on the ship and they're getting away. This is Hugo, and you could imagine that Hugo could have written the novel with someone running after the ship and stopping them. And he can imagine that too, but no, he sees them, and it's almost magical that he can see them.
Yeah.
But I don't think that he would quit the scene if he didn't see them, and he didn't see that it was successful.
Two quick things. One, the magic of the ending is his martyrdom too, because and there's so many kind of knives in the heart in those last couple of scenes. Like when she says, "Oh, it looks like there's somebody on the rock." oh, I mean, he's just, it's brutal. But it just kind of emphasizes the gesture of sacrifice of that, just making sure that she's happy. But I don't know if anyone will relate to this, and I don't even quite know how to explain it. But in thinking about it this time, reading it, if I framed it in my mind, not as killing himself, which is how I thought of it the first time, but as succumbing to fate, it changed the feeling of the ending for me. It made more sense. I mean, it obviously in reality, it's the same thing, but the language that's used, and it connects to that final scene a little bit where he had to kind of wait, the final step of rescuing the engines, where he just kind of had to wait and see what happens. It felt to me like he's been battling these forces for so long. And there were a whole bunch of lines at the end about the things that are out of your control. And this was something out of his control. And he just yielded to it, is what it felt like. I don't know if that.
What was out of his control?
That she fell in love.
Yeah.
That she fell in love with Ebenezer.
Well, I think the way it's set up, he's clearly not the same and as Gilliatt, but that he is the match for her, and that he thinks so too. I think that for Gilliatt, if somehow Déruchette was in love with someone who was not in love with her, that would be a whole different story. But it's as if he looks at the two of them and they're a pair, and they love each other. They can be happy together. And the only thing in the way is that there's this promise and that he's supposed to be on the ship. Well, he can do anything. He can fight a devil. He can do anything. And so he's equal to this also, even though it's not his normal area of interest. What I kind of keep coming back to is that you think he could be the captain of the Durand, but around here in Guernsey, I don't think he wants to be around Guernsey. There's nothing here for him.
Right.
Right, there's nothing here for him. And so, different novel, I want him to go to the United States, to a good place and to do amazing things. But his horizon doesn't go that far. He certainly does not want to stick around Guernsey. He doesn't want to negotiate. He doesn't want to make Déruchette look as if she has not lived up to her promise. He's taken away that. He's straightened everything out. And the thing about La Thierry is that he's already faced death. Because when he thinks that he's failed, every day you die a fresh death when you've come down in the world. And to have been in his own country, they may have an idea who to achieve success. To give it all up to advocate is to cease to exist. Well, actually, Gilliatt saved him too. And I don't think that Gilliatt thinks that he has ceased to exist in the sense of having come down in the world. It's almost as if he's highlighted the fact that he can do anything. Now, again, for Victor Hugo, he rewards people with an honorable death.
He's such an interesting character, because it goes back to the initial discussion we had about him, that there's this combination of heroism and childishness. And the childishness is the oversimplification of purposes too. So Déruchette, a line that stood out to me this time was on 391. It says, if anything resembling a thought had shaped itself in his mind, already that's an interesting, if anything resembling a thought had shaped itself in his mind, it was this, that Déruchette was there, that he wanted nothing more, and that eternity was beginning. So first, he has no thoughts clearly shaped in his mind. Second, what's a substitute for a thought is Déruchette is all. That is the whole of his identity and existence at that point.
Well, it also says it's as if he's expiring. He's in a daze. So he's there and he's not there. And it doesn't even occur to him that he could present himself, which I think in a certain way means that it's not a value now. He's not, doesn't want to act. He's fixed.
Well, it feels like an abstraction. I mean,
Yeah.
she is
Yeah,
like
that's
an
what it is.
ethereal being. It said when, oh, I love that. I could talk forever just about that scene, but the line where it says, she was breathing. If she could breathe, then stars must be able to breathe.
Mm.
So she was this otherworldly being to him that almost didn't have any reality. And then, Shoshana, I appreciate your pointing out. I noticed all the descriptions of her matured beauty, and I found them fascinating and beautiful on their own terms. But she has matured into real love. His is still this kind of primitive abstraction, it seems like.
I also wonder, Sean said something that got me thinking. We don't really, aside from Déruchette, is there anything we've seen that Juliet wants? Right? Prior to Déruchette, we've talked about his kind of like innate moral compass that he has, like in the descriptions of Juliet before Déruchette. You know, he stops the kids from hurting the seagulls. He there's just a bunch of accounts of him doing things that are morally good, but you don't get the sense that he's consciously moved by desire for anything. Or that
Okay, Joseph, I have to interrupt to say, what does he do? He rescues birds. I just realized that. Like, that's his moral compass, is he's the savior of birds. And she's described as a bird throughout this whole novel.
But you know, like there's until Déruchette, there's nothing he clearly wants in life. And I wonder how much of it is Déruchette is the first thing that, again, it's very superficial, but it's the first thing that he's idolized in a way. And now that thing is gone, and he can't go back to what was before. Like, I'm just trying to, like, is that, I don't know if it's a good thing in this context or bad, but I'm not as careful a reader as most people. So maybe there's lots of details I missed that, but I think it allows me to be a bit more content with the ending. But yeah, I wonder is there anything that Juliet really is moved by aside from Déruchette, and any evidence prior to Déruchette? And then does it fit that when she's gone, that has to be the end of his life? Because it does feel different than like some of the other characters like Gauvin dying or Jean Valjean, because they're actualizing some sort of, like, Jean Valjean gets to see Marius and Cosette happy.
And he dies of old age. I mean, he gets to see her in his dying moments, but he's dying of old age. It's not never be deliberate.
But there's like, and like Gauvin's dying for his ideal, and but here it feels like a different kind of ending for Juliet.
I mean, I'm gonna say this once, and I feel like it's blaspheming to say it, but it felt a little pat to end it that way. It just felt a little bit like, I know he's been accused of creating a melodrama here, and it did feel like there could have been a little bit just kind of structural temptation. Just, it really kind of frames the whole story in a convenient way. I hate even saying that, but that is the feel. It didn't feel necessitated to me. It did feel a little bit like a melodrama.
Well, I tried to think of what other endings there could have been, and it would have been so terrible if he had actually married Déruchette. Like, that would have been awful. It couldn't have happened that way. So what else could have happened? And he couldn't be defeated by the elements. Nothing else could defeat him. So he had to choose it.
No, very simply, my expectation would that he'd go back to rescuing birds. He'd just go back to his ordinary life. I would have been perfectly content with that as an ending, to make this gesture and then go back to his life and
he wouldn't be alive, right? He wouldn't, how would he live? He would have no more ideal.
But he didn't have an ideal before she wrote his name in the snow.
That's right.
I know, but how could he go back?
Now that he knows of an ideal, he can't not have that. That would be a denigration of the ideal.
Yeah. I
to
think that's
just
right.
go on as if you don't need such a thing.
Well,
I
Well,
guess I don't get the talking about like the ideal as like an extant generic thing. Is the like Déruchette doesn't have an ideal. That's just like people don't go through life with an ideal. That's not a norm. That's an
There's
aberration. Like Lethierry, he's weird for being so obsessed with the Durand. That's not normal.
Yeah, but I think that's so there's another Hugo quote, I don't know where from, but he says that it's by the real that we exist, but by the ideal that we live. And I feel like that's what he's showing here, or like that's what Juliet does. And yeah, I agree that not everybody does that, but I think Hugo would say not everybody is probably really living.
But to
real like
bridge,
Lethierry is really living because he's obsessed with the Durand.
Yeah, I don't know.
but
I don't know.
but we're
Yeah.
trying to talk about what Hugo is after. Like if it's consistent within Hugo's world. And I think so he doesn't strike me as a character who's actually living by the ideal. I don't, it's
Terry, you mean, or Juliet?
Juliet.
Okay.
I mean, he is in a primitive kind of way, but it doesn't feel to me like it can't be substituted with something else. And trying to see whether I can accept it on Hugo's own terms.
well, you see, he wants her to be happy, and that's what he's made happen.
Does he want her to be happy?
Yeah,
I mean,
he wants her to be happy. See, he overhears her with Ebenezer, and I think it's more important that he hears what she's saying than that he knows who Ebenezer is. Oh, that idiot, you know, whom I saved before. The important thing is that he hears how Déruchette feels about him, and he believes that. So he's got no choice. He can't argue with her. He can't say you're not really in love with the. That wouldn't make sense. He believes her, and this is a new aspect of the situation. It's not exactly as if, I mean, he's lost her in the sense that he was imagining untying the ribbons and that they're going to be together, and that's completely out of the picture now, because right now she's in love with someone else. And
yeah, it's interesting though, that spot, it actually says, and then he stopped, like he could start to imagine, but he couldn't think he'd really do it.
Yeah.
How are you going to get married if you don't really do that? So, and then he said, if she had seen him, he would have run away right then from her. So that's
and he doesn't go after her at the time, you know. I think that's why abstract makes some sense, that she's been distant from him, and well, she still is going to be distant, and now he sees that she's in love with someone else, and he's going to engineer that. And I guess I get the idea. I think it's maybe a dangerous book to share with very young people. Just the notion that that suicide is a good solution if you don't like the world you're living in, and you don't see a clear place for you. But there are other books like that, and for Hugo, it's not seen as momentary. You know, this is a deliberate decision, and you can probably think of other examples where someone, this is where I am, I can't go back, there's no way to go forward, I don't want anything less. And especially since we've seen that it's not as if there are other choices for him, and maybe even part of his simplicity is he can't think the way we could think for him of, I've got a good job for you, Shelley. You know, there are other dragons to fight, there are other things you can do, but he doesn't know about those things. He only knows about what he's seen in his experience, and from his experience he's done more than anyone ever did before, and there's only, you know, second rate, second best, boring, no challenge.
Yeah, I guess maybe the alternate ending would be somebody does stop him, if he
Mhm.
had somebody that would stop him to give just, I mean, you see with Lettieri, give nature time, give it time and endure, and you have no idea what the future holds. But that's not a way of thinking for Gilead. So maybe there's just no way he would stop himself. He
He
would
would
have to have
stop.
somebody else who could stop him.
He
If
would stop.
Derochette had seen him and actually recognized that that head was there,
Mm-hmm.
maybe she would have stopped but anyway, that would be a different ending.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he would have stopped if he had to save someone else's life.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, that
Yeah.
that would
Right.
stop him because
Yeah.
Yep.
And I want to draw a contrast. I've got 3 suicides in Hugo.
Yeah.
So I want to look at them. So the
Quasimodo.
first, somebody.
Yep.
you
Yep.
know-
Quasimodo is
Oh, okay. Well, I guess 4. So I was thinking Javert. Now Javert, it's so clear, and it's been set up so completely that he makes he's confronted with new information that challenges the entirety of his identity, and he can no longer go on with life because who he is was just completely called into question, and it just unmoored him to such an extent that it's impossible to go on. Makes total sense given what's been set up. Simordan was faced with a choice between his 2 rival values, found that he couldn't have complete loyalty to either one, but had to act on behalf of one and couldn't live with the decision of the loss that comes with that. I'm being a little abstract for people who haven't read it, but it's not the same. It doesn't feel the same here to me, that there's a clear the nature of his character has been set up so clearly that we accept it when we get to that scene because we understand why he could not go on. The only thing that I can see that's been set up is this idea of the fixed idea kind of that rules your life, and the idea that Déruchette had become the whole of his existence. And there's a couple of lines to suggest that, but it's not to me as fully worked into his character and the setup of the story like it's shot there. But I think that's why this time I just had a harder time. It felt with Javert, it felt like, oh my gosh, that's so, it's tragic and beautiful and awful, and I see completely where it's coming from. And here I just felt like, wait a second, what? How is this the consequence of his life?
Well, I'm getting persuaded by things people are saying that it's getting hard for me to see he would do anything else. Certainly, it is remarkable that isn't it when he walks by he hears Lettieri and all his plans and what he's actually going to get the construction done and whatnot. So Lettieri is like fully back into life. That was like, no, I could see like, no, that can't in any way be for Gilead. So
I guess we do have to bring Quasimodo in here as a passive death. For
suicide. It was a suicide, right? Yeah.
But a passive suicide.
Yeah, the marriage, Quasimodo, right? That character, or his love or infatuation for Esmeralda, was clearly laid out. I mean, driven into in Hugo style. Whereas Gilliatt and Déruchette and Ebenezer, they're one-dimensional characters. I mean, Hugo will give you 14 examples, similes or metaphors about something to really explain what he's talking about. And he doesn't do that with those 3 characters. The wind, the sea, the reef, they all have more character building than those 3 characters. So Juliet's suicide, self-murder, it seemed like a cop-out to me. Like he didn't know where to go with the story.
Mm. Yeah, it is that. So superficially, he and Quasimodo seem so similar, but Quasimodo's love was so much more fully developed.
Agree.
Yeah.
Javert, his character, his values clearly explained and described. I mean, you know how misguided this guy was. So the self-realization that he had wasted his whole life, most of his adult life, chasing a virtuous man, came back and to get him, and living was no longer possible. That's very believable. Very believable, right?
So okay, go ahead.
Well, I just like, I'm having trouble just integrating the book as a whole.
Yeah.
So this is the things that I don't understand the end in light of the fact of the last 100 pages we read, and that the last 100 pages talked about man's contention with the unknown and didn't bring Déruchette up. And maybe Déruchette should have been more present in my mind the whole time, but I kind of doubt it.
This is why I think of it as succumbing to fate, not as taking his own life. I don't think of it. I felt more peace with the ending when I saw it as a little bit more metaphorical. Not, he specifically, he killed himself over love, but the fates finally overtook him and he yielded to them. And I think there's a lot of evidence that we can find in the text for that. And that, to me, connects much better to all of the battle with the sea. And so much of what he did was his will prevailing over these forces. But then there were times that he had to step back and see what happens. And then he comes back, and this is another element of the fates that is outside of his control. And he's just having to step back and accept what has happened. And then he yields to it, and he is one with the sea. And I felt like the overall, there was that scene that I found so mesmerizing earlier, where it was like the God's eyes perspective that would just see all these things happening together. I kind of pictured it as just seeing the universe, kind of all of the interactions happening together, and that it ultimately is sensible, even though in its concrete elements you might question what the sense of it is.
Yeah,
but
and this
then
is
to have him at the end be one with the sea, it's like we're kind of stepping back and taking that perspective again.
Yeah, and there are two things I want to say about that. One is the line you mentioned of, if she could breathe, then stars could breathe. And then during that whole 100 pages, the stars are very much, stars are one of the signs of the unknown that he talks about. And then also, I also can't spoil Moby Dick, and I am maybe deciding that you might have to read that, even though I don't think you'll particularly enjoy it. But that ending is in some ways really similar, but it has something that this one doesn't. But in the same way, it's the unknown wins in some way there. And there's also that idea of, like, Andrew brought this up 2 classes ago, when the one guy who gets lost at sea for a little while, and then they find him again, and he's like crazy, but what he sees is he sees the fates weaving the pattern, and he sees that someone is doing it, but he can't read, like, he can't decipher the pattern.
And he encounters infinity.
Yeah.
Infinity and himself alone in it.
Yeah.
I'm going back and looking at the preface thing now. I don't know if you want to do that, but I'm reading it in a whole new light. But also it maybe sheds light on the discussion. When he says that he talks at first about the 3 needs. There are 3 struggles and 3 needs. He must believe, he must create, he must live. I think that I originally, and he thinks that that's true. He must believe. Man must believe. And then when he says that talks about the obstacle of superstition, he means superstition is an obstacle to belief and it corrupts it. But he's not saying you shouldn't believe, just that superstition is a problem with that, and dogmas are a problem with that.
Yeah.
And then he says this book is about the 3rd. He must live. The obstacle is the elements. the necessity of things. So that's been dominant in the story. But then the last thing he says is, with these three fatalities that envelop man has mingled that fatality within him, the supreme ananke, the human heart. And maybe that's what we're seeing in Juliet's, both I guess in Juliet and Déruchette, right? Déruchette is the heart. That Déruchette is the heart that he can't overcome. It's a necessity. And then his own heart is one that drives him the way it does, as a fatality, kind of as something that just can't be overcome. I don't know.
But the thing is, it's reality here. Déruchette doesn't love him. She loves someone else. That's not going to change. And I think if you sort of go back and realize the situation he's in, if he actually does nothing, then he's going to end up married to Déruchette, which is going to make her miserable, is going to make him miserable because he doesn't want to be married to her against her will. And Lethierry, he made a deal. Okay, so if that marriage takes place, Déruchette is being asked to do what she said, Lethierry's do what he said, and Gilliatt is the one who knows that this is a horrible thing happening, and he can't let that happen. He basically has to act so that we don't have that whole situation developing in which, oh, a priest, you're in love with him.
Yeah, I know. That there was a melodrama, right? That
yeah,
if you let that all play out, yeah.
Right, he can't let that happen. I mean, he certainly doesn't have. There's no
Okay,
mediator on site to.
Can I have to ask a question now. So, in my mind, he had already succeeded in seeing this marriage through. He'd sent them off. He said why Lethierry would accept it by the time they returned, and so in my mind that issue was closed. But does he think he needs to remove himself from the equation altogether to make sure? And now I'm going to ask a follow-up question on that, because his speech, one of the things I noted to talk about was his speech to Déruchette perplexed me a little bit, and maybe we need to go back and look at that, because I understood that he was trying to withdraw any sense of guilt on her part. You did nothing wrong. Please understand that I was not intending to force you into this, that was part of the ramblings, but there was some part of that just didn't make sense to me. So now I'm wondering, did he believe this was the final step in ensuring her happiness, to just remove himself? Is it not entirely about his own despair, but about seeing this final act of sacrifice through?
Because it's like, then it's still a triumph of the will, right? Because it's just this time, like when he was on the rocks, his death couldn't be part of the plan. But now if it is, then it just is another thing to be done in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But
should we look at that speech?
He's watching her happy when he dies.
Mm-hmm.
And on page 84, it says about the rock place. When your eyes are sated with an excess of beauty and light, it is a pleasure to close them. So I think he dies happy.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking at Déruchette. He's looking at this beautiful view from his favorite spot that he goes to often, and he closes his eyes and succumbs.
But so we've been talking about it in terms of, I see. So he's dying happy. He's not out of despair. That's true too, because he's made this gesture.
Dies with the most beautiful possible vision of.
But the specific question I'm interested in now is, does he die because he sees nothing ahead for him? That's one possibility. Or does he die in part because he wants to ensure, seal that happiness between her? Does he think that he needs not to exist for that to happen?
That would be so stupid. Like, I mean, he's already knows nothing about love, obviously, or women, but to make this final step, to think that he would need to do that, like, it's just it's so meaningless. Like, how, people elope, she'll be fine.
Well, no, but do you think Lethierry would have just been like, oh, all right, I guess you just went back on your word, and I guess he's not going to be my son.
Where is that speech to her?
What else is he going to say? Like, so many, people elope and their families get over it. It's
No,
just not.
but it's also like it wasn't legal, right? He could have had the marriage annulled because no one had his consent to it.
They
That's
didn't
right.
need his consent.
He
She wasn't his father.
Yes, they did. They forged his signature.
forged to consent. And Ebenezer, the man of moral compass, agreed to it kind of just by being caught up in the moment.
Did they forge his signature? I thought he just got him to sign. He got him to sign it thinking it was Juliet was going to marry her.
Right, not forged his signature, but you used it in a fraudulent way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, and Juliet showed the letter saying that he approved of the marriage, but it wasn't talking about that marriage. It was talking about Juliet. So yes, they definitely did, but nonetheless, they're going to be gone for months, and by the time they get back, they'll be married. I don't think that's something they could just annul. I don't know. That just seems so slim to me to think that.
Well, can we look at that speech? It's 422 to 423. I don't want to hold you back, but I think I must explain something to you. On the day the misfortune happened, you were sitting in the ground room floor and you said something. You don't remember. It is easy to forget. You can't be expected to remember every word you say. So that's trying to remove any guilt from her. Like, you didn't cause the situation. Miss Lathieri was in great distress. It was a fine boat, that's certain, and one that had served him well. A catastrophe had occurred and everyone was upset. These are things, of course, that are afterward forgotten. It wasn't the only vessel to be lost on the rocks. You cannot keep thinking about accidents that happen. So in your mind, this didn't have the significance that it did for me. Only I wanted to tell you that when people were saying that no one would go there, I went. They said it was impossible. It wasn't. Thank you for listening to me for a moment. You must understand that in going there, I had no idea of displeasing you. The thing goes back to a time when there was snow on the ground. And one day when I passed you, I thought you smiled. That's how it all came about. As for last night, I hadn't had time to go home. I had come straight from my labors. I was all torn and ragged. I frightened you and you fainted. It was my fault. You shouldn't turn up like that in someone's house. That's about all I wanted to say. You were about to leave. You will have good weather. The wind is in the east. Goodbye. You don't mind saying a few words you don't mind my saying a few words to you, do you? This is the last moment. And then there's that absolutely heart-wrenching exchange about, why don't you keep your trunk for your wife? I shall probably never marry. So he's already decided, I think, at that point, what he intends to do. But I just put a question mark next to that section. I wasn't quite clear what was happening, what he was really trying to express.
So he thinks that she really loved him. He thinks that when she wrote his name in the sand, and also when she said, I'll marry whoever goes and gets it, he thinks that these little signs are signs that she really loved him. And so he's going to do what she really wants.
He thought that, you mean?
He thought.
Okay. Yeah.
And he wouldn't have done it otherwise.
So now he's saying, I'm sorry for being a fool and thinking that.
Right, I think so.
Okay.
One thing I'm struck by is just the fact that he can talk to her like this.
Yeah.
Before all this happened, he couldn't say word one. He'd run away from her, and now he's giving her this, pouring his heart out to her.
Right.
But he says it in such a low voice, she might not even hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't understand it.
No.
She's, look, a squirrel. She's thinking about the first thing he said, and she's not even hearing the whole
Taking it in.
She's still thinking about the trunk. And, oh, you got me clothes.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad. And
it is sad.
Well, it's very sad. But
well, it's interesting because
too, on her part, it's like she can't take in the emotional stuff. She's only looking at this almost superficial aspect of the clothes and the trunk and how am I going to manage.
But can we blame her for not that speech?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody could. Yeah.
It's also just like, you have to remember how bizarre it would be for her.
Yeah.
Like she's seen him like twice in her entire life. And so he does this long speech, and it's like, if she doesn't get the thread that he's madly in love with her and has been, and like risked his life 20 times over for her, like I can't really blame her. I think that probably wouldn't be my first thought if a man babbled to me the third time I'd met him.
He's been madly in love
Right.
with her and battled
And
the sea to prove it.
I don't think she takes any of it in. I don't think she knows that any of this even happened. She didn't know he left. She didn't know he was on the island or that he saved the engines.
Right, right.
She never thanks him for that. She thanks him for setting up the wedding, I think, but not for everything else he's done. And I think he just wants to say it like he's saying it to God rather than to her.
Well, I think also, I mean, there's a little, she's not always completely lucid either, but the scene when she was talking to Ebenezer and he overheard, she said that my heart is broken, I am wretched, I shall die. So he's saving her life. He's not just, making the marriage possible. And her speech, it's again, it's not completely lucid, but the import of it is very clear. Since I've known you, I've learned to pray. This is what being in love with a man means. I didn't realize it. And so basically she's just turned into a person.
Yeah.
And he's letting her off the hook for what she did before she was a person. And he would never have gone and tried to do these things to win her if he had known that they would reach this day in which her thinking that she's got to marry him, that horrible man, is going to be a horrible thing to her, and that the thought of giving up as Ebenezer makes her want to die. He's basically trying to tell her he never meant to put her in this position, and therefore he's removing. That's not going to happen. Why shouldn't you marry? Now, I think we could say that Ebenezer, he's not entirely clear either, and Hugo works to say that he's got inklings of something being amiss here, but after all, he's in shock too. I think the thing with Gilliatt is what's very clear to him is what he doesn't want to have happen. He doesn't want to be the one who is in the way. And I think that maybe that's something that's familiar to us from Les Miserables, because I think that Jean Valjean wasn't as old as all that. I'm just saying, and he was big and strong. I mean, he carried Marius through the sewers. This is not a weak person. He's very strong. But what's happened is that he does not want to be in the way of this couple, and he thinks that his past would be, and therefore he's removed himself. He's not evil. Yeah. And and they chase him down, and after the good angel Thénardier spills the beans, they go after him and tell him that they know the truth, but he's still on the path of I need to leave. I will not be in your way.
So for whatever, the identity of this character for Hugo is his ultimate sacrifice, just like it was with Valjean. That Valjean, he was crawling away to be out of the way of their happiness. And his gesture, his final act is to make sure that Cosette is happy and to devote himself to her happiness. So Gilliatt's is too. Yeah.
Now, again, different writers would write different novels in which the happy ending isn't that the great hero dies. But well, I guess there's a question in 93 about who the great hero is, but I think it's fair to say that if you had to rank them, that the survivors are not the best characters.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that certainly is all over in Notre Dame, and it's in Les Miserables too.
But I guess, so, okay, here's what I'm going to come away with, and it does fit with that instinct I had the second time reading it, is that it's not a gesture of despair. It's not seeing that it's part of the picture of his final act of sacrifice and of yielding to fate. It's not, there's no point in living anymore. And it doesn't have this dark I don't think Hugo intends it to, he intends it to be sad and tragic, but I think it's supposed to be part of the picture of just this ultimate sacrifice for Déruchette's happiness.
Which is a goal of his.
Mm-hmm.
That's something he wants.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not self-sacrifice in the sense of self-denial. I have to throw away my life, but I've got a mission here.
Yeah,
and this
like
is
Valjean's.
So I'm curious about his goal for Déruchette's happiness, because that's clear when he, as you put it, Shoshana, engineers her marriage at the end. Is there anything before that that indicates to us that what he wants for her ultimately is her happiness?
Okay, I don't think there's anything that indicates that. Yeah, I had a question about that too, because I don't think it's her happiness necessarily, but I did go and look up the line that happens after Juliet looks for the doll on the front of the ship, because in my mind, that's like a symbol of Déruchette. And he's going to look for the doll, and it says he had looked in vain for the doll, the figurehead of the Durand. He would have given his 2 arms to find it if he had not had such great need of them. And so now it's similar, because like he would give his 2 arms for Déruchette, but he doesn't need them anymore. So now he can give her that.
Well,
So it's not,
Wait, where does the question come in of whether he wants her to be happy? I don't even understand that question.
yeah.
Well, what I'm asking is this a change in Juliet? When he sees that his marriage to her will make her unhappy, then he thinks, I want to make her happy. Or are there any clues beforehand that suggest I want to marry her, yes, but the thing that I really, really care about is her happiness?
I think
Oh,
the bagpipes.
I think it's just the ideal of like, he can't marry her if she doesn't want that. And he thinks that she does want that. It doesn't make any sense if she doesn't also want it. That's not what he's going for.
well, she did the 2 things. You know, she wrote his name out of nowhere, and she said, the kind of man I want to spend my life with is a person who could do a miracle like that. And he thinks, okay, you rang, I can do that.
Yeah.
You know, and then I'll be what you want. And so he does think that she's going to be happy with him, but then he can't ignore what he hears her say to the shadow, which completely turns around what she now says she wants in her life. And she says, I didn't know what I was talking about before. I didn't know God. I didn't know prayer. I didn't know love. And now I do. And there's been a change in Déruchette. And therefore, if there's a change in Déruchette, that's something that's going to affect his behavior.
I want to point out another line I just noticed in my notes in that garden scene. And I mean, I think the change happens. I want to find the exact line. But I think the change happens. Okay, on page 392, it says, she was pale, her lips were half open as if in a cry of surprise. She had risen from the bench and then sunk back again. Her attitude suggested both flight and fascination. Her astonishment reflected delight mingled with fear. On her lips, there was almost the dawning of a smile, in her eyes, the gleaming of tears. She was as if transfigured by a presence, as if the being whom she saw was not of this earth. Her glance seemed to be reflecting the vision of an angel. And that scene, he is seeing, this is his first glimpse of her love for Ebenezer, and he's seeing it in her face. I love that scene so much. But anyway, I just noticed in my notes that as he's sitting in that garden, there's just the line that he would rather die than go away in that moment. And I was also thinking about this scene with the ship, when he had to position himself in the storm. He positioned himself in the storm such that he would die first if it came to sweep the ship away. So there is this feeling that it's just become a wholly consuming thing that he would die without. He would rather die without, but it's just in such a primitive form that I think it's a little bit hard for us to comprehend.
I think that captures a lot of why I've been okay with it. Is like, I hold the context that he spent 4 years obsessing over Déruchette.
Mm-hmm.
He then has this insanely intense experience, right? Once in a life, like just unreal experience of saving the Durand that he's doing for her and now that thing is taken away. Like I know it is a like what how do you do after that? The only thing I can maybe imagine as a slightly plausible ending is he sees somebody else had written his name in the like as he's walking back, there's his name written by somebody else. Like, but even that, yeah, like it's what else could happen for him now after what he just experienced for 4 years and however long he's on the Douvre. And it's not like I don't think of it as a sophisticated like Javert moment where he's like it's not that's not his we haven't seen any evidence that that's his personality. It's he's moved by these sort of compasses. Déruchette became the magnet, if you will, that pulled the compass. And okay, I kind of like this analogy. Now Déruchette's on the boat, so he has to go to the rock where he can see her. That's where that compass is pointing as she's leaving, and that's kind of just where he has to stay. I don't know, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much he experiences in that's completely beyond human beings and human life. Even to the point of turning to prayer for that and then it's seemingly being answered. And yet it's sort of all when he comes back, it's like all washed away. He doesn't have it's not clear there's any lasting impact on him from that. You'd think that it would lead him to see beyond just the one person he fantasizes about.
But this is what I'm really grappling with, is that it seems like, okay, so Shoshana said he gives his good characters heaven. Well, there's something that seems so at odds between suicide, taking your own life, and being granted heaven. But I think in Hugo's conception, that is what's happening with him. He's yielding to fate, and he kind of seems to see fate as the same as God. And the stars and nature, like it's this conception of the divine that's uniquely Hugo, and we have to accept that as part of the framework for this final action.
Well, he does seem to believe that the dead are still there.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see them and we can reach them and we can write poems to our daughters and right.
Right, but by most Christian, or by most faiths, if you take your own life, you're not going to be granted heaven. That's so, but it seems like it's consistent with Hugo's view of that.
Yeah, I'm the character is thinking I'm going somewhere.
Yeah. Well, is it okay if
I have one more question about that. By the character thinks I'm going there, like, do you think that about him? Like because it seems to me that he doesn't have any conception of that.
Mm-mm.
Or if he does, it's in a very, very nameless way.
No, because it gives him no thoughts of that kind.
Yeah.
But so what Hugo says repeatedly in the book is he doesn't think that, but he feels it. There's a couple of lines that say that. So there's something where he feels he's done his work. He's made the sacrifice. He's ensured Déruchette's happiness. There's nothing left for him to do because he's lost his purpose. And so it's like, it does feel like he's becoming one with the universe now. Like I've yielded to my purpose and now that's it. My task is done and I'm just becoming part of the universe.
You know what this line means right at the end, about his eyes. The immense tranquility of the land of shadows was mounting in the depths of his eyes. What's the land of shadows?
the unknown, or the what he's called the unknown the whole time, which is some conception of the divine. It's mounting in his mind and he's becoming a part of it.
You know, there's a
interesting.
line, just this little bit right here on 427. He puts his hands like this in the gesture that seems intended to wipe out the past. Okay, so my whole life, that's all over.
Moving into the future.
Yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Elena.
Oh, I was just gonna say though that the idea of him like being taken up into heaven is kind of interesting to me, because I thought that there was such a contrast between the two. It describes Déruchette and Ebenezer as two angels fleeing in a cloud, and then he is enveloped by the sea, which is like sinking into the earth. And I just thought that those images were important, but I don't really know how. Like I almost thought of it as Déruchette marries Ebenezer and he marries the sea in some way, like he becomes one with the sea. But it's a little unclear in my mind.
Well, there's even the fact that he's sitting down in the place that he rescued Ebenezer from. Okay, so now he's in the rock, and he was going to be marrying Déruchette, but they've changed places. So, but I think there's we're not supposed to think of Ebenezer as somehow a bad guy.
No.
He's the one Déruchette loves, and he's honorable, and he's brought her to God and so on. But it is true that he was close to death himself. And Gilliatt basically said, I'm not going to let that happen. But in his own case, he's not going to stop it. And, you know, Ebenezer's in his place and he's in Ebenezer's place. It's not somebody has to die, but that's where he is.
I think the contrast between Gilliatt and Ebenezer is really interesting, as like Gilliatt being like the will, and then Ebenezer, well, I mean, they sail away sitting under the four ladies only sign, and to me that's just the funniest image of how he somehow doesn't have a will, or he isn't somehow, I don't know, like I feel like he's saying he doesn't have this element that Gilliatt embodies entirely.
Another line that connects to that is when Gilliatt's like, take her hand, she's gonna fall on the rocks. Right. But he doesn't. He doesn't. It's not his place, but he has to tell Ebenezer because Ebenezer wouldn't even think of it.
But it's funny because it's that, but Ebenezer went and talked to her.
Yes.
Yeah. Gilliatt didn't.
Yeah. No, it is just interesting. I don't think we're supposed to think less of him because of it, but it's interesting that that's so emphasized.
Yeah, it's almost whatever it is that Gilliatt has is almost futile in a way. Like he can take on so much, he can do so much, but in the end, it's whatever Ebenezer has. It's whatever Déruchette has. You know, that's what lets you have love. That's what lets you have love. And society, right? And because Gilliatt's been rejected by all of society. It says he's a person who isn't loved by anyone, in a line at the end. So there's something about, he has this ability to control the whole, you know, all of the elements, all of the physical world he can match with, but something about humans he can't at all. He has nothing when it comes to that.
Maybe this is too much a connection, but I'm reading Shane with my students, and there's the line, there's not the line. There's the line in To Kill a Mockingbird that we always connect with Shane, which is that some people are born to do our difficult jobs for us. And so we always talk about Shane in that regard, and then Atticus in that regard. And there's something similar here, it feels like, that he's the facilitator of Déruchette's happiness. But he's not the type that's going to get to enjoy that kind of.
There's a line that's almost exactly like that I thought summed up his whole character almost on 401, a little bit down from the top. It says, we are a lot of faint hearts and do nothings, coddling our rheumatism. But thankfully, there are other daredevil characters who go out where they are needed and do what has to be done.
Yes.
So thinking about it, and I don't know if this would be pushing that preface too much, but is it possible to think that Déruchette and Ebenezer are able to have the city and have religion without superstition, without prejudice, and so they can live a human life? Gilead is like too
Outside of
that. He's
Yeah.
too outside, and I don't know, maybe that
Yeah, because there's so many images that are Gilead versus society, or not versus in the sense of antagonist, but like contrast, who he is in contrasted with the values of society. There was even that line that I loved just on its own terms about oh gosh, what? Oh, that in society, we're not conscious of these kind of epic battles even happening in nature because we've become so protected against them. But there are still people who have to go to war with them. So he's the person that's having to go to war with those elements while we get to enjoy the cushy values of society within society.
But I think it's really interesting. He does not want to be credited in that way, because when Ebenezer recognizes him, he says, "You saved my life." Says, "I don't think so.
No, I didn't.
Never been there." Well,
that too felt like withdrawing himself from the scene. It felt like another of those kind of exclamation points on his sacrifice, or his like making everything for them. Like, no, don't think of me. Withdraw me from this scene.
Yeah, he doesn't want them to be feeling
beholden.
Beholden, right? And which means he's even basically lying.
And that's just like Valjean too, right? Where he doesn't want Marius to know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Birds don't do anything annoying like that. You can save birds and they won't tell anyone. He wants people to be like that too, I think.
He tells Lettieri, I don't love her.
I know.
Well, I guess that's sort of, it's a theme we've seen elsewhere, that Victor Hugo allows people to tell literal lies. And you remember that was in Les Miserables, the sister, and 2 lies in 5 minutes or something.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love that chapter.
May I ask an involved question?
Sure. I hope I'm going to get people to stick around a little late, because I still have so many things I want to say to praise Hugo. But yeah.
So it's related a little bit to what Steve is asking. Why did Hugo fail to flesh out the main character? I've been thinking about, your very first question, he says, what's a reaction to the ending? And as I mentioned before, I read this like 20, 25 years ago when I was 18 or 19. And admittedly, I read an abridged version, but I was interested in what did I remember from the ending then, and how is it going to be different from what I read now? And what I remember from the ending then was kind of anger, like this is not what he deserves. And that stayed with me, and it was kind of very briefly that he died and he didn't marry Déruchette. And what I grasp onto now, and what this discussion has really congealed, is that he is more in charge of his own fate, about what happens with Déruchette, with crafting his own ending. It makes more sense than I saw it then. And I think one thing is, maybe it's when I read it at that period of time, or my attention level, or this Factors of the Bridge, but I'm wondering if anybody else feels, because I got a little bit of a sense maybe that and maybe this goes to what Steve is saying, that it could have been better dramatized to show that this is an ending that makes complete sense.
Mhm.
And I was curious if I was thinking to myself, okay, would seeing Déruchette's love evolve in parallel to him like taking on the engine and the sea, would that help to see, okay, all right, so it's not going to work out between them, and how is he going to handle that when he comes home? Could there have been something? Did you feel that way, that there was, Lisa, you mentioned it felt kind of pat, or could something different have been done in the dramatization of the story to make it feel like it wasn't, oh, he comes home and then there's something new melodramatic that happens?
I think maybe something could have been made more explicit in that final scene, rather than something happening before, but just more of a clearer indication to us of why this is the way things needed to end. Because we've got theories of why it might, but I'm not able to point definitively at the text and say, here, this is where he tells us, this is why it has to end this way. But I do
tells us in that final speech that he gives to Déruchette. I think that's to us.
I know, but it still doesn't make it entirely clear to me what I mean, it makes it clear why he's facilitating their marriage, but not why he has to die.
But it tells us, this is what I want out of life. I want to be known as the one who saved the engines, that I did that. I did that and no one else could, and nobody else tried, and I achieved
Wait,
that.
but where do you see him wanting other people to know that?
Well, he's talking to the world, because she's not listening. She's not paying any attention at all.
Still
he says it unaudibly in a low voice. This is as loud as he can speak to the world, but he's telling the heavens, he's telling the world, the reading audience.
But I saw that more as pleading his case. I didn't do wrong. I didn't intend to hurt you. I wanted to save you.
It's in a low voice. She doesn't even hear him.
That doesn't.
Well, she definitely hears him.
Barely. She doesn't acknowledge what he said.
But wouldn't that mean he's saying it to himself, not to the world?
Yeah. Well, he's saying it to himself, but it's Hugo saying for him to us. I think that speech is really important. These are his last words.
I do. I think maybe I can share your perspective if I'm thinking of it as, this is what Hugo wanted the character to be. He wanted the character to be this final gesture. And that makes sense to me, but I do think he could have made that more persuasive of why this character could have, this has to be the form that he takes to do that. So Steve says, why doesn't he flesh out his main character? I don't really agree that the character's not fleshed out. I think in the sense that we're accustomed to understanding characters, he doesn't have that flesh. That's the interesting thing about him, is the simplicity, the primitiveness, the lack of actual fully formed thoughts. We're told constantly in the book that he doesn't think something, but that he might feel it. We're told about that compass in primitive natures. His identity is kind of skeletal in a way. It doesn't have these complexities of society. And I think that's why he's not able ultimately to have love either. I don't think he has that. He has something. He has that like core of devotion that's so powerful, but he doesn't have all the complexities and nuance and reality that goes along with being a person actually capable of love.
Well, maybe that's why this is a good ending for him.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't belong here.
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't belong Guernsey. He doesn't belong in our world.
Yeah.
I think it's true
As,
that
as an
he's-
introvert, I strongly disagree with this because I see Gilliatt as completely fleshed out and heroic, and he did this amazing thing. And just because he can't talk about it or share who he is,
I didn't
doesn't
say,
mean,
but I
and that
started
he's
by saying,
socially awkward. It
No.
doesn't mean he's not a hero. But
no, you
look
missed
at
my
what
point.
he
You
did
missed my
all
point. And
alone
hold
the-
on, I want to defend my point. You missed my point
Okay.
completely. I
I
started
did,
out by saying he is fleshed out, that I take issue with the saying, with claiming that he's not fleshed out. The ways in which he's fleshed out are different from the way we conventionally see heroes. So the nature of his flesh is different, and it's simple. So the heroism is like feats of conquering against nature, but that's very different from having complexities of like romantic attachment and being able to express yourself and act. Like he flees from social reality. He flees from it. It's alien.
And one thing I just want to add about his, because I don't want him to appear as just a will. He also, I love the aspect of his character that is that innate moral compass, right? Because there are people like that, and you know, not every hero is an intellectual hero that, you know, has a whole explicit moral philosophy that they've worked out. Sometimes there are just people who know what's right and go towards the good and are capable of doing it. And so, yeah, I love the way you put it. It's not that he's not fleshed out. It's just a different kind of flesh that he has. I did want to remind, just as an example, I'm curious what people think of this example analogy. My friend is following along separately, and his other example from art is Forrest Gump. Is Gilliatt a little like a Forrest Gump type character? Where I don't love the comparison. I think Gilliatt's more heroic, but there is a Forrest Gumpiness to him where he's not super intellectual. He's part of all of
Forrest
these
Gump
amazing.
is inadvertent. All his heroism is inadvertent.
That's true. He's not a will.
Definitely, this is Gilliatt's will is what conquers.
But Gilliatt,
everything he does.
Yeah.
But Gilliatt isn't just awkward or unsocial or something. He's like profoundly strange. Like it just, even just the blurb on the front of by Robert Louis Stevenson, where it says, no character is ever thrown into such strange relief as Gilliatt. It's like he really, there is something like inhuman about him, not in a bad or disparaging way, but he's not like anyone that anyone's ever met / has possibly ever existed. Like he's much simpler than the people who live in any society, which is 99.8% of people in the world, you know. And then to have that along with what the kind of greatness he has is even rarer.
I wonder if he's more comparable to like a Tarzan type character that grows up outside of human society and is like physically heroic and capable, but doesn't have that social ability.
That diminishes him. I really think he's just misunderstood. I think it's society that is the problem in this book, and that's set up in the beginning where he does all these great things that are misunderstood as sorcery. He's misunderstood. He's not the problem.
I still have the sense that you're defending yourself against something that's not being said, though. Who said he was a problem? I don't think anyone said he was a
calling
problem.
him Tarzan implies that he's using the
but I
word
think
primitive
I think what she's grasping at is just something about the simplicity of character combined with heroism. Is that, Heather? Is that, and it is complicated, but I think part of what will be the joy of coming away with this book is maybe there is no character exactly like Gilliatt. Maybe we've got, you know, we always want to relate them to types, you know, archetypal figures that we've encountered before, but maybe we've got a new one now we can add to our pantheon, because he is hard to understand a little bit. And I think we all admire him intensely, everybody who's here, and appreciate all the things he did heroically and the gesture he made at the end, and then just trying our best to comprehend what he is.
I think that saying that he doesn't belong, that
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with him.
Yeah.
I don't think, again, this is in spirit with what Lisa's saying. I don't think that Victor Hugo is critical of him.
Oh.
And we kind of need
No.
to take things from the author's point of view.
When Shoshana said he doesn't belong, the first thought to pop into my head was in the same sense that Cyrano de Bergerac does not belong in his universe. He belongs on the moon.
Right.
And Gilliatt belongs on the moon. There's,
Okay.
it's not the moon, it's in the sea, I guess. Cyrano belonged in the moon, Gilliatt belongs in the sea. So that's the sense of non-belonging, that it's like there's something not, I don't think Hugo is saying he's better than Déruchette and Ebenezer. He's just of a different substance. And the nature of his heroism doesn't align with that kind of a world.
Yeah, because that's the I just didn't want it to be that it's like it's not that he's so good and everything else is so terrible. It's not that Déruchette and Ebenezer are bad for not being like him. It's just that he's different. He's just strange, and like that's
And they
okay,
can't
but that doesn't
understand
mean
each
that.
other.
Yeah.
Or she can't understand him. and
Yes.
value him
This
the
is
way
what
he deserves
Joseph
to
and
be
I,
valued.
sorry, I talked over you. Joseph and I had a little contention this week because he said something about Déruchette not deserving him. And I was like, hold up. That's not, I don't think that's what Hugo is saying, that she's not worthy of him, or that there's anything inferior about her love for Ebenezer. And so I challenged him to find a single line in the book that had Hugo suggesting that she's lesser than, but they are so, I think she existed for Gilliatt as an abstraction, and the love between her and Ebenezer is something real, and it's just different. It's completely different from him.
May I follow up on what Greta's saying? And I'm very curious about how people feel about this. Does Gilliatt feel like a real character to you? And I'm very curious about this because for me, he feels really real in spite of the fact that I'm kind of confused by the last portion of the story and having that be dramatized enough. But he feels really real because he reminds me of my dad. My dad is this sailor who's a handyman, who's quiet, who's contemplative, who occasionally says something that's witty, but is very introspective. And Heather, you said before that you spent time with sailors, and I was curious if you felt that there are traits about Gilliatt that you saw there. And I'm curious about other people, if there are people in your life that you know that you can connect to Gilliatt and say, yeah, he's a real guy, or does he feel really weird to you?
Well, but what does real mean? Because we could get into, like, when Ray was here, his problem was that, he wants real in the sense of a Flaubert character, where we're getting this kind of naturalistic, gritty presentation.
No, I'm not. I don't think in the presentation of the story, but I'm Greta. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like this is a character that feels like it's not like the normal type of person you encounter in society. That you don't feel like you really know this type of person in your life. Is that correct, Greta?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I know a lot of strange people. I don't think I know someone who's strange like that. So me calling him strange doesn't mean I think it's I guess I wasn't saying strange as opposed to real. I was just saying strange as in I think very few of us could find someone like him, and even if we do, it's probably not quite as extreme or something.
Yeah, so that's what I'm curious about. Does he feel strange to you?
In a
that's for
great
everybody.
way. To me, he feels strange in a wonderful way. And he's very stylized to, highlight the sort of characteristics that you're seeing in your father. But very dramatized in that respect. I want to share this line that Andrew Seeley sent me after our last discussion. It's a quote from Tolkien, and he says, "At no time can I remember that the enjoyment of a story was dependent on belief that such things could happen or had happened in real life." He's specifically talking about fairy stories. So he says, fairy stories were plainly not primarily concerned with possibility, but with desirability. If they awakened desire, satisfying it while often whetting it unbearably, they succeeded. So I just like, I love that line, but there's something about it's so, this Gilead is such a fascinating character, because on the one hand, I want to call him a child, and on the other say he's exists on an epic dimension. So there's something epic about him and childish at the same time, which is the unique Gilead character. But the epic aspect seems like extreme desirability and dramatized essences of something admirable. But not exactly real in the sense that I know people like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I know anybody like Gilead for sure. But there is, I don't know, there are aspects of his character I think that I see, maybe like you're saying, Luke, like that you see in other people, certain aspects of his character. And then I think I don't know what the word for it is, but just like the singularity or the unity of his character, how his entire personality is so, I don't know. It's like a laser, like a laser is like all concentrated on a single point. I feel he feels like that as a character for me. Like all of his character traits are concentrated in this single way of being. And it's very, yeah, nobody's really like that, but none of his particular traits are impossible. You know what I mean?
So
And Lisa and I have been talking about this, just like what's the proper relationship to romantic art, and as part of a bigger dopamine conversation we've been having, what are ways that we maybe mishandle that relationship to art. And like part of the proper, I think, is to look for elements of art in life, not to try and aspire to be like art, right? So, is there somebody that's exactly like Gilead? Well, no, because he's an essentialized character. But can you see those qualities of hyper focus in your own life or in others? And like totally. So I think I don't think you'll ever find like a Gilead out there.
It's true, but I think Luke is asking something slightly different, because we're not going to find an Ebenezer or a Déruchette either, but there's something different in kind about Gilead. And as you're asking that, what just occurred to me is that I feel like that's a big part of Hugo's point, is that you people mingling in society with the Ebenezers and Déruchettes of the world don't realize that there are people like Gilead battling the sea. And that's how I interpreted Toilers of the Sea as a title, that there is this type, there is this hero, there is this great man that you don't even know it exists, and you don't even know is doing this sort of thing to provide for your comfort. And I read a secondary source that suggested the title is misleading, because we don't even encounter these workers of the sea that we're told about in the title, as if we're just going to learn about a bunch of Guernsey fishermen like doing their ordinary tasks on the coast. But that's not how I interpret it at all. I think Gilead is the toiler of the sea, battling the elements. So I don't think I know a character like that, and it feels like that's part of the point.
Well, I know a character like Hugo then, who has made it their mission to expose Toilers of the Sea, which is Mike Rowe. Like, think about Dirty Jobs. Like, I think that seems like the perfect comparison of like his whole mission is to show you all of the people who are doing the jobs that you don't want, like you don't know about and don't pay any attention to, and even look down on.
Well, I could talk for a whole lot longer, but I feel like I should let people go now because we're over time already. There are so many individual scenes, lines. Part of the reason I said I'm going to come in this session now unforgiving of people who didn't like the book is that there are in every scene, I was able to find something with such depth of insight and such poeticism of expression that it seemed like you have to treat this as a great book on those grounds alone. I mean, from Lethierry's despair and recovery, and what despair and recovery look like, or what a fall from grace in society feels like, the dying 1,000 deaths, or just the expressions of love in the scenes of Gilliatt gazing upon Déruchette, and then the like mingling of their shadows into one being. I mean, just the beauty of the romance of it. And the repeated times, this is a Hugo device, but where he'll have these long scenes that are riveting on their own terms, but you're waiting for the punchline. And it's often a painful punchline. There are a number of those in 93. And in this section, there were, I think I noted 6 of them, where we're listening to Lethierry at length praise Gilliatt's heroism and call him my son. And then we're waiting for the punchline at the end, I don't love her. So absolute just genius of like, stirring up the emotions, and then genius of insight. And I guess I'll confine myself to one moment that I loved so much. And Luke, I thought of it for you in regard to the Huguenot lovers. It's on page 412. And it says, the very last paragraph, it says, and pressing against him, she clasped her hands together around his neck, as if to hold onto him with her arms and join her hands in a prayer to God. He freed himself from this gentle embrace, which resisted as strongly as it could. Just that image of her with her hands clasped around his neck and him gently pushing back from it. But anyway, there are countless images like this. So it's not that it's not that everyone has to love this novel, but I do feel like a little like Arnold Bennett, like if you don't appreciate it as exceptionally beautiful and full of insight and drama, then you've missed something. All right. Well, this was a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful to everybody. It really enhanced my understanding and appreciation of the book. So thanks for experiencing this with me. And I will send out details very soon about our next play, which will be beginning next weekend with Sue Lloyd.
Thank you, Lisa. I love this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.